Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, and I hope I don't have any friends left at the end of the night, which sometimes happens to me. By which I mean I hope you'll all be my comrades enlisted in our campaign here in Hastings and Rye. My name is George Galloway, Member of Parliament for Bradford West constituency, and the leader of the Respect Party. I don't often find myself in Hastings, and I certainly almost never find myself in a bar. But this is a kind of special bar, I must say. And I'm very grateful to the owner for putting up with us this evening. And I hope that whilst I'm the last person to encourage people to drink alcohol, I hope he does well at the cash register as a reward for allowing us to have this meeting here this evening. Hastings is kind of a special place for me. Some of my dear friends live here. Steve Finnerty from Alabama 3 is there, is working with us on the Tony Blair film that we are going to be bringing out very soon indeed. So soon that Mr. Blair's knees are beginning to knock together. I can almost hear them. The film's called The Killing of Tony Blair. It doesn't involve me actually killing Tony Blair, though it would be a very successful film if it did. It deals with the killings of Tony Blair, the killing of the Labour Party as we knew it and needed it, the killing of 1 million people in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places, and the financial killing which Tony Blair has been making out of the previous 2 killings in the 7 fat years that he has enjoyed, if that's the word, since leaving office. 7 fat years for him, 7 lean years for the British people, but even worse for the people of the Middle East, where I remind you, he is laughably engaged as the Middle East peace envoy. That's going well, isn't it? Steve lives here. My friend Lloyd Williams and other great musicians come from Brighton. David Lofts, our candidate, is also a musician. And we've got a bass player as well and quite a few instruments lying around. So later, I think there'll be quite a jam session going on. But let me just say a few words more about Hastings. Hastings was the site of the most important book that I've ever read, at least non-religious book. The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropist, written by Robert Tressel, who was buried until recently in an unmarked grave in Liverpool, was one of the most seminal books of my life. It made the case for the politics that I support and have supported all of my life since my early teenage years. It made the case against racism, unbelievably, written in 1901 in Hastings. It made the case against the witch hunting, scapegoating of immigrants in almost exactly the same words as I'm going to do tonight about the scapegoating and witch hunting of immigrants more than 100 years later. Of course, the immigrants in question, when Tressel wrote that wonderful book, were Jewish immigrants. But the discourse around them was identical to the discourse that we have today. Well, they dress different to us. They eat different to us. They even insist on speaking their own languages, even when we are around. Their relations with their women are different from ours. They don't go to pubs. They don't drink. They haven't integrated with our way of life. All of that is directly from the dialogue in the Ragged-Trousered Philanthropist, written here in 1901. And yet, have any of you heard similar discourse in the current climate in which we're living? I'm certain that you have. So I'm going to start with that issue as I describe what respect stands for. We fight racism. And racism includes Islamophobia, hatred, fear of Islam, and anti-Semitism, hatred, fear of the Jews. We are against false dichotomies in life. We think, and I've just spent a long time on the road in Scotland trying to kill another false dichotomy that's out running in our society, namely that Scotland's problem is the English. And if only Scotland could break away from the English, everything would be hunky-dory. We reject that. We reject the idea that immigrants have anything to do with our current problems. I came here today driving through the city of London, the richest square mile on the earth. In that square mile, the recklessness, dishonesty, absolute greed, avarice, and corruption of a small number of people has brought this country to the brink of ruin. Indeed, some parts of the country actually to ruin. And I promise you that almost none of them were immigrants. I promise you that almost none of them were black people. Almost none of them were Asians. They were white people like me, wearing white shirts like me, though they probably had a tie, and I don't. The people who have brought this country to the brink of ruin were as British, as roast beef and Yorkshire pud as anybody in this land. And because of their recklessness, for which, by the way, they haven't paid any kind of price. As I always say, if you pick someone's pocket in the Liverpool Street station in the city of London, you'll be behind bars pretty damn quick. But if you pick a bank, if you pick a finance house, a stockbroker company, if you are a part of the small coterie of people that have almost bankrupted Britain, your chances of ending up behind bars are practically zero. None of these people have paid a price, either legally or financially or economically, for the crimes of the bankers that brought us to this. Virtually none of them have gone to jail, and most of them are still earning the same kind of obscene bonuses and salaries that brought us to this pass. Who's paid, therefore? Who's paid are the people who never caused the crisis in the first place. The people in the industrial and post-industrial parts of Britain, the people in seaside places like this one that are on their economic uppers. They are the people who have paid the price for this crisis, even though they had no part at all in bringing it about. So we say we will not tolerate a strategy, a policy that asks the working people who are entirely innocent of all offense to pay the price for the crimes and greed of the rich and powerful. We say that to freeze public sector wages year after year after year, and Ed Miliband has just made clear that if Labour is elected in May, public sector wages will continue to be frozen. That's simply unjust. We say that the people who depend on the public services that the public sector workers provide cannot be asked to pay the price for this crisis. Why should they? They're already living on the edge of poverty and penury. Some of them on the edge of oblivion. People, disabled people, for example, committing suicide as a result of the harassment that they feel under from Atos, the agency set up by Tony Blair's government, continued by Cameron's, that witch hunts disabled people as if they were somehow the cause of our problems. So we reject the idea that the workers and the poor must be made to pay. And it follows, as I implied, that we certainly reject the idea that the problem of ordinary people here in Hastings is Muhammad, who runs the corner shop, or Ravinder, who runs the local cafe or Indian restaurant. They contributed nothing to the problem we had. And as a matter of fact, the immigrants in this country are oftentimes doing jobs that no one else can either do or wants to do. In many cases, people are in this country because we have been bombing and attacking their country. And it seems particularly perverse to be making war around the world, creating a wave of refugees, and then making a hue and cry when relatively a tiny number of those refugees end up on our shores. I mean, if I was going to put it bluntly, it would be if we stop invading and occupying other people's countries, fewer of them would be refugees and fewer of them would be here. So we reject the idea that our problems are anything to do with the immigrant population and the children and grandchildren now of those immigrants. Because when Farage talks about immigrants, he's not differentiating between somebody whose grandfather was an immigrant, but whose father and mother were not immigrants, still less is he or she an immigrant. But they look different to us, just like those Jews in The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist, written in 1901. Equally, we reject Farage's idea that our problems are to do with Johnny Foreigner across the channel. In fact, the SNP in Scotland are the mirror image of Nigel Farage. According to the SNP, Scotland's problem is the English. According to Nigel Farage, England's problem is Johnny Foreigner across there. Both of these are entirely false analyses. Our problems are not that we're in the European Union. In fact, if we pulled out of the European Union for all of its faults, which are many and deep and profound, Britain would be up a gum tree. We would be up the proverbial creek without a paddle. And I'm here to say to you that the constant search for somebody else to blame, other than the economic and political system that we ourselves allow to be implemented against our own interest, is a false dawn. It's chasing a chimera, which will lead to nothing but further trouble. I alluded earlier to the question of war. If we stand for three things, it would be these. The one I've just talked about, the reality of our economic and political crisis here in this country. The second would be our propensity to go invading other people's countries and creating, multiplying, pre-existing, no doubt, problems in the world. And if we have any leading role that we have played over this last decade or more, it would be in our struggle against the wars. Respect, and me and other leaders of Respect were the leaders of the anti-war movement. And everything that we said turned out to be true. And everything that our adversaries said turned out to be false, where they were not actually a deliberate falsehood. I always make the point now when I'm interviewed on television, which happens less and less often, I always make the point when they describe me as controversial, I always say, what's controversial about having been against the Iraq war? In fact, the only controversial view on that now would be to continue to say that the Iraq war invasion, occupation, had been the right thing to do. Are there any sentient beings left in the land who think that invading and occupying Iraq was the right thing to do? Tony Blair, I absolve because I think he's frankly gone mad. And I'll come to him again later. I said personally to Tony Blair, if you invade Iraq, the fall of Baghdad will not be the beginning of the end, merely the end of the beginning. If you invade Iraq, there is no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but if you invade, there will be hundreds of thousands of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. If you invade Iraq, extremism will cascade across the entire world, including in our own country. There will be drive-by shootings. There will be bombs. There will be people committing suicide in order to kill as many of us as they can. I told them all this outside the gentleman's lavatory in the library corridor of the House of Commons, to be absolutely precise. I told him all of this. But he didn't listen either to me or to the millions of British people that were marching on the streets even before they knew what they know now. Think about that. Millions marched against the war, even when we must have believed Tony Blair's claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And now that we know that that was all just a pack of lies, what insanity the Iraq war must seem now. All of these things that I warned Blair have come to pass. Sure, Saddam fell. Sure, Baghdad fell. Was that the end? Was that mission accomplished? Is Iraq better now? How could anyone claim that? 1 million dead Iraqis. 3 million Iraqis living as exiles across the world. The lucky ones here, the unlucky ones begging on the streets of Jordan and Syria. ISIS, the head-chopping, heart-eating, throat-cutting maniacs, are governing 1/3 of Iraq and a good part of Syria. And people like them, as far away as Nigeria, are declaring themselves a part of this so-called Islamic caliphate. So far did extremism cascade as a result of the Bush and Blair war that 4 or 5 madmen blew themselves up on the London Underground and on a London bus, killing 55 of our fellow citizens, maiming hundreds more. And just in the last few days, just across there in France, we saw yet another twist to where this fanaticism and extremism has spread. And all of it coming out of a swamp of hatred against us because of Bush and Blair and people like them and their attitude to and the actions that they take against Muslims, against Muslim countries. So we're against racism, we're against war, and we're against an economic system that punishes the poor and punishes the worker for the crimes and misdemeanors of those who scarcely know what a real day's work is really like, who think that pushing numbers around on a computer screen constitutes work, constitutes wealth. We think it constitutes neither. One last thing before I turn to the local. One of the crises that we suffer is a complete collapse in credibility of our political leaders. We're in a big mess in this country. We've been in a big mess before. In 1940-41, we couldn't have been in a bigger mess. We stood entirely alone. Hitler was at the Channel ports, ready to invade and occupy us. All of Europe had been subjugated. Neither the Soviet Union nor the United States were in the war. That's what you call a mess. That's what you call a problem. The difference between then and now is we had a leadership then that knew what to do and that was ready and able to do it. Do we have that now? I don't see it. I look across the green benches in the House of Commons. I sometimes see a shiver running along looking for a spine to run up. I look at the mannequins, these dummies with their speak your weight machine dialogue, pretending to hate each other, scrapping it out on the floor of Prime Minister's questions. But you couldn't slip sixpence between them. As I trademarked, they're two cheeks of the same arse. And if an arse could have three cheeks, it would be the three leaders, the three front benches. They all stand for one or other variant of the same thing. And they're all playing games with the race question for fear of Farage and UKIP, all accepting his agenda, all moving in his direction. And that's very dangerous. Because if the prevailing orthodoxy is as homogenic as they are, standing for the same things, and those same things not only will not solve our problems, but are in fact the reason for our problems, you risk the complete collapse of faith and trust in politics at all. And that's, I think, where we are. If you look at the ratings of David Cameron, Nick Clegg, which are almost off the radar, and Ed Miliband, you'll see that hardly anybody in the country has a good word to say about any of them. And the reason that Farage is doing so well is because he's not them. Because he doesn't look like them, sound like them. Although in fact, he's even worse than them. That's the dilemma that we're in. So, enter us. We are the ghost of Labour's past. We stand for the things that Labour used to stand for. We stand for the people that Labour used to represent, but has now neglected or at worst abandoned. And we're standing here in this constituency at the general election in May. We think that this place and others need respect. They need the kind of politics that we stand for. And we're going to offer it. And if you want to join in, you should make sure that we know how to contact you at the end of this meeting tonight. You can join Respect very, very cheaply. Richard, what does it cost? £12 a year, £1 a month. You can join it very, very cheaply, but you don't even have to join it. If you don't want to join it, don't join it. Just join the campaign here, where we have an outstanding local candidate. Now, I don't know if she's still in the room, but the Labour candidate for this constituency was here earlier. I think she's a little anxious that we're standing. Well, we've always been ready to negotiate. Ed Miliband knows where to find me. If he would like to negotiate an electoral pact, we'll talk about that. But you can't ask us not to stand when you have betrayed the ideas that we stand for. Why should we support you? Why shouldn't we argue for the ideas that we believe in? If you don't want to negotiate with us, I say to the Labour candidate, start negotiating with the people who might vote for us. Negotiate by moving in the direction that we point. And if you don't blame them if they don't vote for you and choose to vote for us instead. Now, David Lofts is a local man with a phenomenal record of work in the community, in the fields of mental health. I don't know if you're aware that the mental health statistics for Hastings are double the national average. Imagine. There are twice as many people, 100% more people with mental health issues in Hastings than in the country as a whole. He'll tell you why when he comes to the microphone. David specializes in that field, works in that field, and demands proper service, proper treatment, proper care for people with mental health problems. He's a wizard on the computers. He builds websites, runs them. He's campaigning for the living wage. Never mind a national minimum wage, a national living wage, because nobody can live on what they call the national minimum wage. He's involved in all kinds of community activities, as well as being a musician and involved for a long time in the music business. And he is steeped in the traditions and the life here of the people in Hastings. I think he's a very credible and an important addition to our list of candidates, and he's going to be coming up after you've had the chance to ask me any questions. Thanks very much indeed for coming. Thanks for listening. Thank you. Well, the bar's now absolutely full, I'm very glad to say. Let me take some questions. Yes, madam. How can we put Palestine on the political agenda? Well, it's well and truly on the political agenda. When I began my own contribution to the Palestinian cause in 1975, you could have fitted all the supporters of the PLO into this bar and had room for a couple of elephants at the back. Now we are millions. I mean, there are millions and millions of people in this country that would identify in any survey their sympathies with the Palestinian people. And there are many more millions, indeed the overwhelming majority, all except a tiny fringe handful of nutters who are certain that the Palestinian crisis is the heart of the matter. It's the heart of our problem in the world. And that if there is no resolution with justice for the Palestinians, there'll be no peace. There'll be no justice, there'll be no peace in the Middle East and therefore in the wider world. Almost everybody agrees with that now. Trust me, it wasn't like that in 1975. So almost everybody now knows that a solution has to be found to the Palestinian people that provides at least sufficient justice that this conflict can be brought to a close. And the vote in the House of Commons in recognition of a Palestinian state was overwhelming. I think only 18 supporters of Israel turned up to vote against it. In the Irish Parliament, nobody voted against it. Can you imagine? In the Irish Parliament, it was a unanimous decision. In the French Parliament, the Swedish Parliament, indeed the Swedish government has already recognized an independent Palestinian state. This is an idea whose time has come. It's an idea which is hegemonic in the world, dominant in the world. So when people say to you, as some might, I don't know if any of them came, but they were threatening to come, the so-called Sussex friends of so-called Israel, when they come, when they shout or heckle, remember that they are the ones who are a tiny minority. They are the people who've lost, profoundly lost the argument and are dogs barking as the caravan moves on. The truth is, all of the momentum is with us who have supported the Palestinian cause. As I see you're wearing the keffiyeh, which has become a universal symbol of the struggle for liberty, for freedom in the world. There's nobody walking around waving Israeli flags except a tiny fringe group of nutters. Next question.
So George, we've got economic, we've got environmental, we've got immigration, right? How long have we got for sanity? When's it all going? When's the shit going to hit the fan?
Well, it's a good question. I think we're in real trouble. I think there's real trouble in the country, and there's real trouble in the continent, and there's real trouble in the world. The dominant capitalist narrative has broken down. It's quite clear that the political and economic system that everybody in here has lived under all of their lives is no longer, if it ever was, but no longer certainly, able to solve the problems of the people. And the economy is supposed to work for the people, not the other way round. We're supposed to devise political and economic systems that serve us, not the other way around. And clearly, the prevailing orthodoxy of what they call democracy, which is really a shamocracy, where two cheeks of the same arse, if you'll forgive the metaphor, clap against each other as if it was meaningful when it is not, and who stand for essentially the same things. And a capitalist economy where the capitalists can only exist if the public bails them out. Imagine. What we have is private profit underwritten by public taxpayers' money. These banks, if they really were capitalist enterprises, would have gone to the wall, would have gone bust because of their recklessness, their dishonesty. But instead, you were forced to bail them out thousands of pounds per head. I don't know if you're all aware of that. All of you have paid thousands of pounds each to rescue private banks. There's nothing actually capitalist about that. Adam Smith would turn in his grave. So we have a private enterprise system that depends on public subsidy and depends on the public considering them too big to fail, too big to jail. And that cannot persist. We're headed for a crunch. And the problem, the danger is, when the crunch comes, will people blame the right culprits or will they blame the wrong ones? This is where my arguments about Farage and about nationalism and racism and so on come in. Because there will be plenty of Sun headlines, plenty of headlines in the Daily Express, if that's still coming out, seeking to point the finger at the wrong culprits in order to deflect attention from the right culprits. So we don't have unlimited time. I don't have unlimited time. None of us have unlimited time. But our children, and I have many, by the grace of God, are facing a future, the first time in centuries, where my children, your children, are likely to be less well off than I was, than you were. In all preceding generations, one's children had a better life than the parents. They lived longer, they had better houses, better jobs, better wages, better standard of living. This is the first generation whose children face a future poorer, shorter, and less satisfying in every way than the generation of their parents. And that's a dangerous set of circumstances. I'll give you just one example. I never went to university. I left school at 15. I went to work in a factory, Michelin Tires. I've worked my entire life. I've never been idle for a single day. I've paid tax. How many hundreds of thousands of pounds of tax have I paid? And I paid it so that people like Tony Blair could go to Oxford University entirely free of charge and get a grant to enjoy it with. I was slogging on the assembly line, making ZX radials, paying tax to send Blair to Oxford. And the first thing that he did when he got into power was kick away the ladder so that our children can't go to Oxford, or to any university for that matter, without running up a debt of tens of thousands, scores of thousands of pounds. There's one concrete example where today's children are worse off than the children of the people still in power in politics today. And there are many, many other examples I could give. Anyone over here? Yes, the lady there.
I applaud everything you've said so far. I'm very interested to know what you have to say about the blind eye that the other parties have made, or just lip service to tackling global warming and other environmental problems, which of course will hit the poorest people most and hardest.
Indeed. It's not that they won't admit it. Some of them actively, consciously deny it, including our Minister for the Environment. The person in charge of Britain's environment doesn't believe in man-made global warming, doesn't believe in the environmental depredation of the economic system that we have. Look, it's kind of obvious. Capitalism is about the employer or the owner taking decisions in the interests of themselves and their shareholders. In fact, they have a legal responsibility to do that. They have no real legal responsibility to take your interests into account. Their primary fiduciary legal requirement on them is that they so conduct the business as to maximize the profit for their own shareholders. You can't blame them for it. That's the rules of the game. But if someone's taking private economic decisions in their own interest, there is absolutely no guarantee that the decisions that they're making are in the public's interest. And indeed, for the most part, they're not. I always give the metaphor. Forgive me if you read it from me before. The man who decides to move his large yacht by road, taking up 2 lanes of the motorway, has made an entirely rational decision in his own economic interest. But the 50-mile traffic jam behind him, because the motorway has been reduced to 1 lane, they have a different set of consequences. The public, the environment, the economy, the interests of all those other motorists and families in the cars stuck behind them, they have an entirely different take on this, different perspective. So any rational state would say to the owner of the large yacht, I'm sorry, you can't move that on the road. You'll have to find another way of transporting it down to Hastings or wherever it is you're going with it, because you will do more damage to the public interest than can be justified by your own private gain, your own private interest. And if you expand that idea I've just given you to the national economy as a whole, why would a private company, private owners, private shareholders care about despoiling the environment? They're only in for the short term and the buck. They don't care what your children or their children will have to suffer in the future from the degraded environment that contemporary capitalism has produced. Indeed, they're not allowed to care about it. It's their duty to make as much money as possible now. So that's why I say that the prevailing economic system that we have is not fit for purpose, if its purpose is to serve the needs of the 65 million people who live on this small island. and we need profound, radical change. And we're not going to get it from any of the mainstream parties. Yes, sir.
George, first of all, let me commend you for your support for the Palestinian people, which I think is a wonderful thing to do. For
Thank you.
the years you've done it. Secondly, is the question that arises in my mind with regard to Nigel Farage. He has put forward a question with regard to the centralisation of power in Europe. And it concerns me that Europe seems to be getting power which we can't check. There seems to be no democratic way of checking their power, and this is a worry. See, because I don't want to support Nigel Farage and that outfit, but on the other hand, I'm worried about Europe, and I'm worried about it taking away the basic democratic rights of the ordinary individual.
Well, thank you for the kind remarks that you made on Palestine. And it makes it harder for me to profoundly disagree with what I think is your perspective on Europe. Although, of course, there's much to criticize about Europe. Europe is the best place in the world to live. It has the best standard of living, the highest levels of care, and the greatest levels of social peace anywhere in the world. I alluded earlier to 1940 and 41. By 1945, more than 90 million Europeans lay dead. They tore each other to pieces in 2 world wars in just a few decades apart. The European Union has provided not only an absence of war on the European continent since its foundation, war between European countries is now absolutely inconceivable. And that's a pretty big advance. And it's one that younger people might not grasp quite so easily as those of us born quite so close to the Second World War's end, or in some cases, can't really see the audience, maybe there are people here who lived in the Second World War. So anything which seeks to destroy, as Farage does, the idea of a united Europe is my enemy. Because I think I know, what the consequence would be of a Europe catapulted backwards into national antagonisms that may very well resolve themselves with war in the way that they did twice in the 20th century. I'm with you entirely on the question of democratic accountability and control. But I think, if I may say so, that you're viewing the levels of democratic accountability and control that we have here in Britain through rose-colored spectacles. We have no more control over our lives through Westminster than the European Union citizenry, including ourselves, does through the European institutions. I don't boast about that because the level of real democratic accountability that we have in either case is almost zero. And it's another of these false dichotomies to set up one against the other, the lack of democracy in the European Union compared to a perceived level of democracy in Britain. We have almost no democracy in Britain. We don't take the major financial and economic decisions ourselves, and the few completely dominate the political system to the disbenefit of the many. That's true on the British level, and it's true on the European level. So whatever problems exist in Europe will not only not be solved by Britain leaving Europe, but will be made much worse if Britain were to leave Europe. Here's what we really need. Let me be bold and honest with you. No point in pretending that I think otherwise. We need a United States of Europe. just like there's a United States of America, like there should be a United States of the Arab countries, like there should be a United States of the African countries, like Chavez struggled for in South America, a United States of Latin America. That's the direction of travel that we should be going on. Why? Because only big, powerful, populous collections of public power, popular power, can possibly challenge the power of multinational capitalism and the domination of the globe by the United States model that we have suffered from. Now, that doesn't mean Britain ceases to be British, whatever that means. Every one of us here, I think, is British, except my missus. She's not and refuses to be. But most of us here are British, but we're all different from each other. And moreover, we're really not that much different from the people. Is France over there, by the way? Have I got the geography right? That way. The people over there. Not much different at all. We are men and women, boys and girls, young and old, gay and straight, black and white, workers who have nothing to sell except our labor. If we don't get paid for it, or we're out of work, we've got no money, we're all the same. These national differences are fake. And moreover, they're really modern. Germany didn't even exist until 1870. Italy didn't exist. So that means, I was explaining it to one of my kids the other day, my grandmother knew people who lived before Germany existed. Think about it. Before Italy existed, states come and go, but they're entirely fake. They don't actually mean anything. I argued this so often in the Scottish case. Brian Souter, the homophobic, Bible-belting bigot who runs Stagecoach, the bus company, a union-busting Stagecoach, a union-busting private corporation who gave millions to the Scottish Nationalist Party for their referendum, gave millions to a campaign to witch hunt gay people. So he's Scottish. So what? I despise him even if he was born in the next street to me. He has nothing to do with me. It's a fake idea that you have some identity with somebody because they were born on the same piece of rock as you, which was in any case a matter merely of chance. Our identity is something deeper than that. And it is profoundly affected by our relationship to wealth and power. If we're a bus driver in France, or a bus driver in England, or a bus driver in Scotland, we're probably all working for Brian Souter and Stagecoach. And the interests of the bus drivers are far more in common with each other than any of them could be with Brian Souter because he has the same colour of passport as them. So I appeal to you to think big on this. What we need is not a weaker European Union, but a stronger European Union, democratically accountable. You're right about that. We've got a European Parliament which is filled with stooges. Could anybody name them? Anybody name me 5? 3? Can you name me 3 members of the European Parliament? I could not. And I'm a professional. I could not. Nobody ever hears of them, hears from them, holds them to account in any way. And the reason for that is that the European Parliament has no real power. It cannot control the actions of the European Commission, still less the actions of the European Central Bank or the big multinational corporations that dominate the European economy. Europe is a great place with a really heavy cultural and historical weight. It's a huge market with a huge population. It's of real importance, and it should have the political weight in the world that its economic and cultural weight would suggest. Instead, it's a mere rubber stamp for the United States of America. George Bush, Barack Obama, they tell the European Union what to do. A classic example is what's happening over Russia now, over the Ukraine, where we are imposing sanctions on Russia which are damaging our own economy, especially the German. The German economy is being ruined, has just moved into negative territory because of its sanctions that it's imposing against Russia, which it doesn't want to impose, but which the United States is forcing them to impose. If we had a powerful Europe, we would tell the United States to sling their hook and look after their own problems instead of interfering here in Europe and forcing us to take actions which we don't want to and which are damaging to ourselves. Anybody down here?
Thank you for that.
Okay, welcome. Thank you. Gentleman with the glasses.
We're in the Union Bar, and quite a few people would be very happy if this became a trade union centre for Hastings. Carried on as a bar, of course, isn't it? So we'd like to know what about the relationships between the Respect Party and the trade union movement?
Well, we come out of the trade union movement. I joined the Transport and General Workers Union on Christmas Eve of 1973 when I went to work in Michelin Tires. There weren't many union offices open on Christmas Eve, but mine was, and I remain a member in good standing. I have been an honorary member of the National Union of Mine Workers since 1982, and it's one of my proudest possessions. We come from the labour movement. We believe that the cause of labour, small l, is the hope of the world. We believe what Rosa Luxemburg said more than a century ago, that socialism or barbarism is the choice facing the world, and we believe that that's even more starkly the case now than it was when she said it. Having said which, unions are not the same as they were. I was giving a talk a day or two ago in East London, and one of the women in the audience told me later that her father was Bernie Steer, one of the Pentonville Five transport union activists from the docks, the London docks, that were jailed by the Heath government, which caused the upsurge in trade union and political upheaval in the country, which contributed massively to the Heath government being overthrown in 1974. Bernie's still alive, by the way, though he must be in his 90s by now. In those days, there were 12 or 13 million trade union members. The TUC had one of the highest levels of affiliated memberships of any of the working classes of the developed world. Now it's half of that. And the unions, with some rare exceptions, are not led as they were led in those days, by people who were ready, willing, and able to confront the power of capital and the governments that capital employed against them. But these things will change, as they have changed, so they will change in the future. I just say this, I'm interviewing Arthur Scargill on the program that my wife and I do on RT on Saturdays called Sputnik. I'm interviewing Scargill soon. Scargill was right. The miners were right. And if the workforce in Britain had stood beside the miners and achieved victory over Thatcher's attempted destruction, which of course succeeded, of not just the miners' union but mining communities, and more importantly, even than that, the destruction of trade union power in this country. When the miners made a stand, if the other unions had made a stand with them, Thatcher would have been defeated and Britain would have been a very different place today.
So what's happening with the BBC? Should we pay the licence fee? Like, how do we get an unbiased news program?
Well, it's none of my business whether you pay the license fee or not. All I can do is tell you that I don't pay the license fee. I refuse to pay the license fee. And I'm ready to, I have a TV and I watch BBC and I refuse to pay the license, so come and get me. Although they're showing a remarked reluctance to come and get me because they know that when I get into court, I'll have plenty to say about the reasons why I refuse to pay my license fee. The BBC is a national disgrace. It is a state lackey which does the bidding of the political class that provide the very, very handsome salaries and other emoluments that they enjoy. And don't even get me started on the kind of people that they employ. I had lunch yesterday with Andrew Neil of BBC Politics. On a personal level, I have a good relationship with him, but I left him in no doubt, as I'm leaving you in no doubt, that I will not pay the license fee, even if they take me to prison as a result, because they're lying, distorting, ignoring all of the important things that our people need to know. And it's bad enough when that's done by Sky News, because at least Rupert Murdoch is a private individual. It's up to me whether I pay for his package or not. But it's not up to me whether I pay for the BBC or not. I'm committing a criminal offence if I don't pay for the BBC. And yet I have no say whatsoever in what goes on in the BBC. I can't even get on it. I'm on Question Time on the 5th of February. So look out for that. Fireworks. But that's because Question Time is not made by the BBC. It's only shown on the BBC. It's made by David Dimbleby and he likes me. But in the course of this last week, for example, as the world, or Europe at least, was turned upside down with the events in France and the backlash against them, you'd have thought, wouldn't you, that maybe one single local BBC radio would have called me up for a comment? You would have thought maybe that very late at night or very early in the morning, the BBC TV might have been interested in what I had to say about the subject, but call came there none. And the reason is, they're as much of a state broadcaster as any of the other state broadcasters that they like to malign. I think everybody who can do so should watch RT. RT's news is like watching a parallel universe. If you watch the British, or even worse, the American news, Fox News, try it. Watch Fox News for 20 minutes and then cross, I know it's asking too much, then cross to RT for 20 minutes. You'll think you've been visiting two different planets. But I know which planet is more close to the truth and the reality, and that's RT, and I commend it. Thank you. Any, yes, gentleman right at the very back. Yes, very tall.
I was going to say, I completely agree with the point you made earlier at the beginning about most problems in England being blamed on immigration and how it's completely incorrect. And I feel, and I'm sure everyone else does, there's real problems in why we're being led right because of huge, massive corporations within England. And I was wondering what you would do firstly to combat that, and secondly, why you don't think that any of the leaders that are currently in the power at the moment accept that. If anything, they exaggerate that it is immigration that's causing these problems, rather than actually admitting the truth that it's corporations that are doing this to this country, not immigration.
Well, well said. Well said. I couldn't put that better myself. I don't know if this interview has appeared yet, but someone from BuzzFeed, which is a news thing on the internet, interviewed me the other day, and they said to me, how come Nigel Farage is very much more successful than you? I said, well, it's quite easy to sell prejudice, bigotry, xenophobia, chauvinism, racism to the simple-minded, or the undereducated, or the unconscious. It's much more difficult to sell what I'm trying to sell. which is a profound and revolutionary change in the interest of the mass of the people and against the domination of our lives by the few. That's a much bigger ask. But look at this place tonight. And I'm speaking every day and every night. And my meetings are always like this. So there's a big audience for. And on social media, I've got more or less 1 million followers. And if I say something, as I will now, after this, about this meeting, the best part of 1 million people will instantly receive it. Whereas if I wrote a column in the Independent newspaper, 40,000 people would read it. So we do have some assets, and we are getting somewhere. We are on the march, and I think we are going forward. One thing's for sure, the others are going backward. The reason why they don't say the things I'm saying is that they're scared to do so. You see, what I'm saying to you, I'd be saying if this hall was almost empty. And I'd be saying if it was 10 times more full. I don't say one thing one night and a different thing another night. One thing to one group of people and a different thing to another group of people. I'm telling the truth as I see it. And I'm advancing the propositions that I think need to be taken, whether you like it or not. If I was the last man standing for Palestine, for example, I'd still be saying it, even if nobody agreed with me. And my view is that the public want that. That's actually the reason why Farage is popular. Because people think, whether you agree with him or not, he's actually saying what he really believes. And they know in their hearts that Cameron and Miliband and Clegg are not. They're not believable. They're not trustworthy. Nobody would buy a second-hand car off them. You really wouldn't, would you? Some of them, I mean, Ed Miliband, you wouldn't send him out to buy a loaf. Would you? You certainly wouldn't know what price it was. You wouldn't know which way to hold it, which way was up, which way was down. These people have nothing to do with the real lives of ordinary people. And ordinary people know it. And that's why they're so turned off by them. Now, in many constituencies, there'll not really be a choice. People will have to vote for one or the other. But if I choose the oldest person in this room, I'm not going to identify them. It might even be me. The first election, general election, after I was born, 98% of the people of Britain voted either Labour or Conservative. 98%. Only 2% in 1955 voted for anybody else. Now, Labour and the Conservatives together will be lucky to get 50%. That's how far the mighty have fallen. That's how incredible the mainstream political parties now are. And I think the Liberal Democrats are going to get completely wiped out. I don't know if the Liberal candidate's here as well, but if they are, hard luck. You've lost your deposit. Let me predict. Let me predict that. The Liberals have lost every deposit in every election since the last general election, and they're going to lose dozens, scores maybe, of their parliamentary seats. So the centre is not holding. If you define that as the centre, the three cheeks of the same arse, it's not holding. It's collapsing because people have seen through it that not only have they not the solutions, they are the problem rather than the solution. Last question, I think. The big fella at the back.
Thank you very much. You said in one breath that the BBC is saying all state broadcasters and that it's inherently biased, and then in the next you commend RT.
Yeah.
That's contradictory.
Not at all. I'm calling for honesty. RT openly and honestly declares that it's the broadcaster of the Russian government. But the BBC does not. The BBC pretends it's somehow impartial. But you know, as a newsman, there's nothing called impartial. Everyone has a point of view. I prefer the Russian government's point of view to the British government's point of view, don't you?
Does that include on gay rights?
Well, the Russian government's policy on gay rights is not one that I support. I think I made clear in the course of what I've said this evening. I'm not only a supporter of gay rights now, I was when it was very far from fashionable to do so. That's why one of my prize awards from Stonewall, the gay rights campaigning organization, sits on my mantelpiece. You still call it mantelpieces. You call it that down here. Sits on my mantelpiece. But in the round, I prefer Putin to Cameron, don't you? I prefer the Russian government to the British government. The Russian government's not flying around the world bombing everyone, invading everyone, occupying everyone. The Russian government is not pursuing the same policies of mass impoverishment of the working people that the British government is. So, in the round, I prefer RT to the BBC. I think they're telling the truth, whilst the BBC are lying. There's nothing contradictory about that. Sorry?
Two ticks of the same arse, isn't there?
I don't think so, no. I think the RT, if you just give it a chance, watch it for an evening, you'll be amazed at how much you agree with, at how much you concur with their view of the world. Try it. I only invite you to do that.
I have watched it. I do watch it.
Yeah.
And like yourself, I think you're better off watching maybe some of your American news, your British news, and your Russian news, and then finding some middle ground because they're all fucking full of shit. So you've got to try and pick the truth from what they say.
Well, you can do that if you like. Indeed, I think I'm the one who suggested doing that. But the well, here's my overarching point, that the days when the Tories and the Labour totally dominated British politics are over. The days when the BBC and ITV totally dominated the news market in Britain are over. Now, all of us can find our truth, and I agree it's a subjective matter. All of us can find our truth if we go looking for it. We can try RT, we can try Fox News, we can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. You can read the left-wing progressive publications from around the world. You can find news as it happens just by searching for it. In other words, we're no longer dominated by or need to be dominated by any broadcaster, either RT or BBC. But I'm clear and honest with you. I prefer to get most of my news from RT. Their view of the world concurs with mine.
And it seems to me also that RT has puts forward questions.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, I've just come across RT. The BBC, on the other hand, seems to be following a narrative
Yeah.
that has no diversions to it.
No.
It doesn't ask any questions anymore.
When they launched
And I was born
when
with
they
the
launched
BBC.
Russia Today UK and they advertised for it, it was being censored because they were asking so many.
What was being censored?
It was being censored by the advertising authorities and by Ofcom,
Right.
which governs RT. But it's fearless, and it employs, to answer some of the critics here, it employs quite a pluralistic group of people. It employs me, but it also employs Larry King. He's no leftist, but he does ask interesting questions. He is a good broadcaster, and he's been at the top in international broadcasting for a very long time, and now he works for RT. Max Kaiser is not a leftist, he's not a socialist, he just hates corrupt bankers' capitalism, and he's on 3 times a week.
He's also gay.
He's not gay, no, as far as I know, but what would that matter?
Well, it would,
Oh, I see.
it would fly in the
Oh, I
face
see, I
of
beg your
the-
pardon.
the-
I beg your pardon. No, there's a lot of gays at RT, but Max is not one of them.
George, we
Yes.
know very well in this town from the time of John Logie Baird that the BBC
He was a Scotsman,
were
by
a
the way.
corporation of mostly American companies, EMI included. That's why he declared war on them, and they wouldn't publish his or publicise or help him with his television.
Indeed, and they denied
They
that
were
he
an American corporation.
they denied that he invented it. but not least because he's a Scotsman, I insist that he did. And you as Hastings people no doubt do the same because he lived here. Yes, sir.
Just changing the subject.
Yeah.
This is the Iraqi contingents from Hastings. First of all, thank you very much.
You're Iraqi?
Yes.
For society, ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you very much. First of all, just to thank you very much for your stance on the Iraq War, and just wanted to ask a question. Are there any realistic possibility of indicting Tony Blair?
The gentleman is from the Iraqi community here and asks what's the realistic possibility of indicting Tony Blair. Our film, The Killing of Tony Blair, will be out very soon. Looks like it's going to be out before the Chilcot report, which took its last piece of evidence more than 4 years ago and still has not reported. One of the biggest scandals in contemporary British history. And our film has 3 goals. One is to achieve the sacking of Tony Blair as the Middle East peace envoy. And I'm confident that we will achieve that. I'm confident that Blair will not be the Middle East peace envoy for very much longer. The second is to make him so toxic that no self-respecting government or corporation would continue to employ him at multi-million pound fees because his name will be so darkened. And the third goal of our film is to have Blair indicted for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, for misleading the British Parliament, the Queen, and most importantly, the British people, including the armed forces. And if Chilcot does not, and I suspect it may not, but who knows what's in the report. If Chilcot does not recommend criminal action in the courts against Tony Blair, then I, if I'm in the next House of Commons, will be a part of a group, cross-party group, who will seek to impeach Blair at the bar of the House. That's not a bar like this one. It's a different kind of bar. And that impeachment would give us the power to send him to prison ourselves. What I can promise you is this. As long as God gives me breath, Tony Blair will never have a day's peace from me. Never. Okay, now, it's not all about me. We've got a local candidate of real quality and caliber. He's not a bad musical performer too. I give you the respect candidate for Hastings and Rye, David Lofts.